Shalom, Israel. First and foremost, I want to say all praises to Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Salutations to you brothers throughout the four corners of the earth, teaching the truth and righteousness and sincerity. To you Israelite foreigners, come back home to the truth. To those that have passed away, serving the Lord, the dead in Yahweh Shai shall arise first. I want to kick off a series of videos. This is going to be a series, Lord willing. You know what I'm saying? Just basically knocking that doctrine of Gabar calls it black Israelites. You know, I'm gonna call it black only Israelites. You know what I'm saying? Because number one, we don't want to give our so-called African American, West Indian, and Haitian brothers and sisters the impression that we're against them. Like, listen, you know, you're a so-called black, Haitian, or West Indian. Come back home to the truth too. You know what I'm saying? But what we want to do is we want to gather our people together, man. We don't want to leave any stone unturned. You know what I'm saying? You got Israelite foreigners out there from different countries, you know, that's getting called all types of Hamites and Edomites, but they really go back to the bloodline of Jacob. We want them in the fold too, man. The Most High wants them in the fold. So, you know, I'm going to start off the series, you know, with a scripture. Zephaniah 2:1. Gather yourselves together. Yea, gather together, O nation not desired. You know, the nation not desired is Israel, man. Whether you in China, whether you in Korea, or whether you a so-called Hispanic or Native American. The so-called African American, you know, a lot of you so-called African American, you black only Israelites are fucking wicked. You know, you don't want us to come back to our heritage. So the first book that I'm going to review is a classic in Israel by William Lorenz Katz, Black Indians, A Hidden Heritage. I was going to write down the points, man, but I highlighted everything when I first read this book. You know what I mean? Let's see. All right. There's got a lot of gems in this book, man. You know what I'm saying? All right. In the introduction, get this book for yourself so you know I ain't lying. You know, when I pull out a excerpt, right? It says, the number of Afro-Americans with an Indian ancestor was once estimated at about 1/3 of the total. So what that means is about 1/3 of you so-called black, you black-only Israelites, about 1/3 of you go back to the Native Americans. About 1/3 of you is really, you think you so-called black. And this is Americans, so this ain't even going into Benjamin and Levi. This is going into you so-called black Americans. And it's saying about 1/3 of you has Native ancestry, Native American ancestry. Now, of course, some of this is Native American women. So, you know what I'm saying? And it's the man that determines the bloodline. But about 1/3 of you have ancestry that's Native American. You know what I'm saying? And then it says Latin America, the percentage is much higher. So for all of you that say the so-called Hispanics are nothing but Spaniards, your ancestry goes back to the natives that were here, man. You know, so without further ado, let's see. Let me get some of these hidden gems out of here. Oh, here we go. I have on page 7. This is still the introduction, by the way. I have defined black Indians as people who have a dual ancestry, or black people who have lived for some time with Native Americans. When slaves escaped to the woods and joined or began remote communities, they are called by the Spanish term Maroons. So you so-called black people, you know what I'm saying, so-called Judites, you know, well, you Judites, you escaped with the 10 tribes and you lived amongst them, right? All right, so now I'm going to go to chapter 1, right? It goes into some notable Native Americans, right, that y'all think are Japhites or whatever the fuck you think they are, and they really Israelites, right? A very famous so-called black person in history, the first person that gave his life in the Revolutionary War. On the snowy night of March 5th, 1770, Crispus Attucks, a black native Indian, stepped dramatically into U.S. history in Boston. He was the first to fall in the Boston Massacre. All right? So it says, this is a so-called Native American, right? So he's Gad. Paul Cuffey, a Dartmouth Indian with African parentage, became a wealthy merchant. So this is probably a Maroon, because he's so-called black ancestry, but probably lived among, because it says with African parentage. Became a wealthy merchant and ship owner in early Massachusetts. In 1815, he personally paid for and led 38 settlers aboard his ship Traveler to Sierra Leone. All right, so there goes your black Israelite. Actually, that is literally a black Israelite. Let's see. Here goes Willie Lynch among the so-called Hispanic or the so-called Native Americans and the so-called blacks. Whites turned Indians into slave hunters and slave owners, and Africans into Indian fighters. Light-skinned Africans were pitted against dark-skinned, free against enslaved, black Indians against pure Africans or pure Indians. So the white man was using the divisive tactics among us. Let's see. Okay, let's go into the hatred that the white man has for the Native Americans. It sounds almost like the same hatred towards the so-called Negroes. It says, Thomas Jefferson, speaking of Indians, said, "We would never stop pursuing them with war while one remained on the face of the earth." So as long as any Native Americans are around or alive, we'll never stop pursuing them with war. To this day, there's Native Americans. So obviously, this statement rings true. Andrew Jackson, the first great Democrat to reach the White House, was first in a long line of candidates to win presidency, boasting of his Indian fighting skills. He waged a cruel war against Indian men, women, and children. He's a fucking coward. He staunchly defended slavery, and so, in other words, you notice that your interests were killing Native Americans and enslaving so-called Negroes. So the interests of the so-called white man was together against both of us. He staunchly defended slavery, and like Jefferson, owned slaves. To save their families, black Indians had to fight off posses and armies launched by these national heroes. These motherfuckers became heroes in America off of killing our people. Let's see. Okay, here's another one. Dealing with the psychology of our people in the 60s. Children of the black awareness of the 1960s have rarely cared to mention an Indian ancestry because this might be seen as a denial of their African origins and the value of blackness. Black! Let's see. This chapter goes into how so-called Negroes fled amongst the Native Americans. On July 13, 1984, the people of Roanoke Island, North Carolina, their names emblazoned on books, t-shirts, and silver commemorative medallions, began a year-long celebration. It is their proud claim that U.S. history began with British settlement on their island. Fast forward a little bit. The English newcomers sent to Roanoke Island in 1584 by Sir Walter Raleigh are a case in point. When a silver cup allegedly disappeared, the Roanoke men roared out of their tiny enclave, muskets and torches in hand, to destroy Indian neighbors, villages, and crops. So they went, just like just like with Rosewood, when something happened, they went and attacked the nearest Israelites around, which was Native Americans in this case. Let's see what other Jews we got in here. Okay, here we go. While failing to survey a site or build good relations with anyone, the two men captured 70 Native Americans and brought them back to Santo Domingo as slaves. Let's see. This is in 1520. Captain Francisco Gordillo. Let's see. Looking for. I didn't even write this down. Like I'm just looking through the things that I've highlighted. Oh, in November, a crisis erupted when Africans rebelled and fled to the Indians. This was in Puerto Rico. Okay, this was in October 18th. Doesn't say the year here. I'm sure it does in a previous paragraph. Oh, 1520, same thing. The Europeans left home, but Africans remained. Oh, the Europeans left for home after 5 months, but Africans remained to build their own society with their Native Americans. So look at that. The so-called Native Americans Native American history is in line with so-called black history. A lot of you so-called black people are really Native Americans. Let's see. He started by, this is Christopher Columbus, he started by shipping 10 chained Arawak men to Seville, Spain. So you're sending Taino men to Spain. When he loaded 1,100 Taino men and women aboard 4 Spanish ships, the crowding and the stormy Atlantic crossing took a fearful toll. Only 300 survived. Wow, sounds like the slave ships that brought so-called Negroes to America. But this is Tainos to Spain. But the so-called the Native American, the Hispanics are not Israel, right? Let's see. A few years later, this is still during the time of Columbus, Bishop Las Casas, who had witnessed countless Indian massacres by his fellow Spaniards, blamed greed for the horrors. They killed them because they want to be rich and have much gold, which is their sole aim. Las Casas concluded that in the New World, Spaniards had become devils and the Indians were the only true Christians. He pointed out that Indians died off by the thousands from slavery and European diseases. Sounds like so-called Negroes too. Forced labor in Spanish mines and in the Americas was so harsh that the average worker died before he was 26. Check that out. Let's see. Oh, here we go. The next two peoples, meaning the so-called Negroes and Indians, so-called Indians, began to discover they shared some vital views of life. Family was of basic importance to both, with children and the elderly treasured. Religion was a daily part of cultural life, not merely practiced on Sundays. So they lived, 7 days a week practicing their faith. Both Africans and Native Americans, of course, when it says Africans, it's talking about Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, found they shared a belief in economic cooperation rather than competition and rivalry. Because you know what? In the scriptures, the Israelite community wasn't competing with one another. We were actually all trying to, have our economic plan set up, so that there's no poor people. Or if there are poor people, they're still taken care of. The 80 million Native Americans alive in 1492 became only 10 million left alive a century later. But the 10,000 Africans working in the Americas in 1527 had, by the end of the century, become 90,000 people. So we cut down the population of the Americans, and the so-called Africans were, more of them. You know what I mean? So it says in 1519, when the Spaniards arrived, Mexicans had a population of 25 million Indians. By the end of the century, only 1 million were still alive. 1 million were still alive. So it says, by 1650, Mexico alone had an African Indian population with some white ancestry of 100,000. See that? So, you had so-called white people mixed in there, but they had a lot of so-called black Indians in Mexico, right? So it says, in 1511, Governor Ovando forgot his opposition to importing Africans as slaves. One black, he marveled, can do the work of 4 Indians. Now let's see. So this is chapter 3, Between the Races, We Cannot Dig Too Deep a Gulf. Let's see if there's anything good here. Yeah, see, that spirit of black only, we're going to destroy that spirit of black only with scholarship. Okay, here goes a good one. Europeans concluded it was, this is on page 34, Black Indians. Europeans concluded it was absolutely necessary to remain armed and use one race to fight the other. So he was basically using Gad and Reuben against Judah, Benjamin and Levi. Europeans would throw their own soldiers into the fray or hire Indians living nearby. Let's see. Here we go. In the next 10 years, revolts spread to Colombia, Panama, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Mexico. In 1527, a major insurrection threatened Spanish headquarters at Mexico City. Spanish meaning from Spain. Viceroy Antonio de Mendoza reported that Africans had chosen a king and agreed to kill all Spaniards, and that the Indians were also with them. So how did it come from us being together to, it all being about so-called black people? Here we go. It was in Mexico that Europeans made their strongest effort to keep Africans apart from Native Americans. Black men far outnumbered their women and so sought Indian wives. So extensive was contact between red, meaning Native American here, and black people that Spanish law prohibited the two races from living together or marrying. So the white man told us we couldn't intermarry between the Native Americans and the so-called black tribes. As early as 1523, Hernando Cortez was given a royal order to keep Indians in their villages apart from Africans at all costs. This was only 7 years after Venice, Italy isolated its Jews in the first ghetto in history. Racial mixing was so common in Mexico that it became hard to tell by skin color who was free and who was a slave. From the time of Columbus, the gravest threat to European domination of the Western Hemisphere came from outlaw communities of former slaves. This is going into the Maroon camps. The history of the Saramacca people of Suriname in South America started around 1685 when African and native slaves escaped and together formed a Maroon society. So this is Northern Kingdom and Southern Kingdom. For 8 generations, Dutch armed forces tried to crush their community, but today it is still alive and boasts 20,000 members. For the Saramaccas, liberty came in 1761 when Europeans abandoned their wars and sued for peace. Look at that. So here goes. Some Maroons perched near large cities and lived as bandits. They raided local plantations, merchants, and even Indians and slaves. See, fighting amongst each other. Let's see. Johannes King, an African who lived among the Matawi Indians in the Guyanas in 1885, recalled his people's struggle to stay alive during decades of warfare. Here is the story of our ancestors and their difficulties while they were at war with the Bakra, which means whites. The whites were always pursuing and attacking. They slashed crops to bits, ruining everything they saw. They set fire to everything they didn't want to carry off with them. Well, that enraged our early ancestors against the whites. So this is going into like how in the book of Obadiah, white people fucking destroyed everything, right? I'm not even through half this book, but I got to cut this video short because there's not enough recording space. But let's see. African patterns prominent in farming and defense were also important in government, administration of justice, and religion. Many Maroon colonies adopted forms of Christianity, but allowed a number of competing religions to flourish. Maroons were convinced that each day still alive was worthy of a blessing to a powerful outside force. In the 18th century, Captain John Stedman, leading Dutch troops against Maroons in the Guyanas, wrote that Maroon foods were superior to European products and in great supply. Men and women in Maroon settlements were often described as healthy, tall, and muscular, a tribute to their diets and to their freedom, because they likely weren't eating all the crap that the fucking Europeans was eating. Like pork, shrimp, crab, and lobster and all that shit. Let's see. Black Indians in Venezuela in 1728, for example, ran a successful shipping operation Europeans wanted. So the white man wants in, he's going to force his way in. Led by a man named Juan Andre Sote, they carried cacao from Spanish merchants in the Yaracuy Valley to Dutch merchants on Curacao, about 150 miles away. Philip V of Spain awarded his European friends a monopoly of this trade, placing them on a collision course with the business run by the Andre Sote. In 1732, Spain sent out 250 soldiers, including 150 men conscripted from Indian and African slaves, to challenge the dark businessmen of Andre Sote. Dark businessmen of Andre Sote. He maneuvered his army into battle with such skill that the slave and native soldiers deserted the European command. This is Andre Sote. He maneuvered his army into battle with such skill that the slaves and natives deserted the European command. Because remember, out of 250 soldiers, 150 of them was so-called black and Native American. Only 100 crackers. André Sodi's sharpshooters muskets fire then brought down all but 44 European soldiers. But Spain had not given up. It sent 1,500 troops after André Sodi after he had to slip off the Curacao to save his life. However, it did take Spain another 5 years to eliminate their dark business competitors in the Uruguay Valley. Colonial law often threw whites into jail for trading with the outlawed Maroons communities on their borders. Right? So they made laws against white people trading with the Maroons. Before 1700, most Maroon leaders were, like their followers, so-called African-born. Some of these colonies built dynasties on African models that lasted for generations and had royal courts, cabinets, princes, and princesses. So I'm going to cut that short because the video's about to cut off. I'm going to upload this, Lord willing. I'm going to finish this book. You know what I'm saying? Black Indians. This is a classic book in Israel. You know what I'm saying? But basically, you notice the intermingling of the so-called black and Native American cultures, you know what I'm saying, throughout history. You know what I mean? We're going to go more into it in the next couple of videos, but, you know, I'm going to upload this and free up space on my phone. But with that, all praises to Yahweh B'Hashem Yahushua. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Salutations to you brothers throughout the four corners of the earth, teaching the truth and righteousness and sincerity. To you Israelite foreigners in other countries, you know, in China and in Africa. You know, if you are Israelite, come into this thing. You know what I'm saying? To those that passed away in Yahushua, the dead in Yahushua shall arise first. Shalom.